Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May Allah Azza wa Jal bless you, and may Allah Azza wa Jal reward you for joining me, inshallah, in this series on Islamic etiquette, Al-Adab Al-Islamiyya As-Shar'iyyah. May Allah Azza wa Jal make us of those who adhere to those Islamic principles and practice them so that we become an example, and that Allah allows us through this to purify ourselves and to follow our Prophet ﷺ, and to adorn ourselves with these Islamic principles, with these manners, so that we would have the best of character. As the Prophet ﷺ said, that the best of you are the people with best character. The ones who will be closest to me on the day of judgment, and the ones that I love the most, are the people with the best of character. So there is no other way of gaining the best of character except in learning how the Prophet ﷺ behaved, and in learning what Allah Azza wa Jal loves for us to be and not to be. So all of Islam, as we explained before, all of Islam is adab, all of Islam is character. When you know what Allah loves and you do it, and you know what Allah hates and you avoid it, then you will be adorning yourself with Islamic character, with manners that Allah loves. And that is the purpose of our ibadah, to purify ourselves externally and internally, so that we can come closer to Allah Azza wa Jal and be the best Muslims and human beings that we can. And this only happens through adab. So, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, this is lecture number 6, and today we're going to be talking about something that's interesting. We finished talking about the tongue and the manners related to the tongue and the sins related to the tongue. Now we'll be talking about music and singing. And that's how the author moves to that area, and he starts talking about that. So it's also part of adab, subhanallah. It's not just a matter of fiqh, because fiqh is supposed to guide us into how to behave, what to do in certain circumstances, what to avoid. That's what the purpose of fiqh, isn't it? So music is not just simply about fiqh, whether it's halal or haram, but it's also an issue of adab. And it's sometimes an interesting or even controversial topic. And why is it? Because it is so widespread, like it's everywhere, which really wasn't the case if you maybe go about, maybe, I don't know, 20 or 30 years ago, or maybe 50 years ago. Now it's really everywhere. Like as soon as you step outside of your house, if you go to the grocery store, there's music. You go for gas, there's music. I turn on the radio, you just want to listen, to news, there's music. Inside your home, you go online, there's music. You can't escape it. There's music everywhere. Right? It's so widespread, and it's so part of everything that it's almost hard to extract yourself from it. So you come to someone who sees music everywhere, and you come to someone who has gotten so used to it and so listening to it. Like some of us could go and seek it, and we know the latest albums and the latest hits and so on, and we listen to it every day. It's part of our routine, part of the way that we unwind, relax. So you come to someone like that and you tell them stop listening to music. That not only looks very odd, but very difficult too. And they will say, well, what's wrong with it? I listen to it and I still pray, and I listen to it and I still fast. Why do you say it's haram? What is really wrong with it? I think we can combine both. We can be Muslims and we can still have music as well. And since music is a form of art, and it's so prevalent worldwide, if we retreat from that, then Muslims are just going to simply listen to foreign music. We should have our own music. The argument could be, we should have our own music, embrace it, rather than run away from it. And the question here really, inshallah, is if music is something that Allah Azza wa Jal loves, then definitely we can embrace it, and we can improve on it, and we can excel in it. There's no problem with that. But if it's not something that Allah Azza wa Jal loves, as we will be talking about it inshallah, if it's not something that Allah Azza wa Jal loves, so what's the use of embracing something that Allah hates, just simply because everybody else is doing it? So what a Muslim is supposed to do is not look at the world as it is and say this is how it's supposed to be. But you look at the world and decide how it should be, how it should look like, not accept it as it is. So if we find today, for instance, that there's a widespread sin, whatever that sin may be, or a widespread mistake, we're not simply supposed to just accept it because everybody else is doing it, supposed to ask ourselves, how can we change and become better? How we can find an alternative to it. So we'll talk about that inshallah Rabbil Alameen as much as we can, and if you have questions about it, ask me. Again, if I can answer them inshallah live, I'll do that, or I'll save them till we meet inshallah next week bi'idhnillah azza wa jal. So the author al-Mardawi, and it's a poem, remember, right? So the author al-Mardawi says the following. I'm just translating it. So he says, flutes and clarinets are outlawed, and what is like them of bad entertainment. That's Arabic, I'm translating to English. Even if there is no singing with them, and also string instruments without exception. So he's saying, rahimahullah, and he's coming from the Hanbali madhab, legal school, but he's really also expressing a widespread opinion here. Among many madhabs, among the 4 madhabs, he's really expressing a widespread opinion. What he's saying is that the flutes and the clarinets, al-mizmar wa shababa, these are like the simplest musical instruments. Okay, maybe they're like even very ancient, but the simplest musical instruments. He said these 2 are outlawed, meaning that they're haram. Avoid them, they're wrong, they're sinful. So avoid them, he says. And what is like them? وَمَا يُضَاهِيهَا, anything that is like them of musical instruments, entertainment instruments, also that is forbidden. He says even if there's no ghina with them. So, point inshallah to keep in mind, if you are reading or you're listening to classical traditional literature, when they mention the word ghina is singing, but sometimes they mean by it singing with instruments, and sometimes they mean by it singing without instruments. Ghina could mean singing with instruments, or sometimes could mean singing without instruments. So for this author, ghina is singing without instruments. Okay, because he's going to separate them. So first he's talking about instruments, and then he'll talk about singing without instruments. Now he's talking about just about instruments. He says even if there's no singing, no lyrics with them, just music, he says even that is forbidden, even if it's just a flute and a clarinet, right? And then he adds later, and also string instruments. If there are string instruments, also those are prohibited. So in the commentary he says, pay attention that the author is doing what? Al-Mardawi. He says he's signaling that even the simplest musical instruments are forbidden. Even the simplest one. To tell you that the more sophisticated ones are also forbidden. The exception, of course, is the tambourine, a deaf, which we'll mention inshallah. He doesn't talk about it, but we'll mention. That is the exception on certain occasions that can be used. But he's saying that in general, all of them are forbidden. So he's saying that even the simplest one are forbidden, which is what the more sophisticated one should be also forbidden as well. So that's why later he talks about the string instruments like guitars and the oud and the likes. Now, mizmar here, the word mizmar, is interesting, right? The flute. Because the Prophet ﷺ uses that in reference to music, and the Sahaba use that in reference to music. And they call music, okay, mizmar al-shaytan, the flute of the shaitan, the shaitan's flute, the shaitan's clarinet, okay? And the Sahaba use that. So in one hadith, and this is at the death of Ibrahim, radiyallahu anhu, the son of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when Ibrahim died, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam shed some tears. So some of the Sahaba said, "O Prophet of Allah, did you not forbid us to do this?" Because they understood, or they thought that even crying over your son is disallowed. He said, "O Prophet of Allah, did you not forbid this?" So the Prophet ﷺ said, "No, this is mercy." وَإِنَّمَا نَهَيْتُ عَنْ صَوْتَيْنِ أَحْمَقَيْنِ فَاجِرَيْنِ. He says, what I forbade are 2 foolish, sinful sounds. A sound that is made when you're blessed, and a sound that you are made, that is made when you're afflicted. The sound that you make when you are blessed, لَعِبٌ وَلَهْوٌ وَمِزْمَارُ الشَّيْطَانِ. Fun and entertainment, and the flute of the shaitan. What does he mean? Music. That is, what is he saying, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, about that first sound? The sound when happens when you're blessed, when you're happy. is you have a party and entertainment, and in that you play music. So he's saying, I've forbidden that. And the other sound that I forbidden was صوت عند مصيبة, when there is a disaster and an affliction, الويل والخمش وكذا. يعني he said sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and the other one that I forbade when there's a disaster is when you wail and you rip your clothes and you cry out loud. He says that is the other sound that I forbidden. Not simply shedding tears or crying over your son or your daughter when you lose them. And then he said sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and he said, which is actually beautiful, just shows you that he feels and he felt sallallahu alayhi wasallam exactly as you feel. But how he deals with it sallallahu alayhi wasallam is our model. Okay? So he said sallallahu alayhi wasallam what? About the loss of his son Ibrahim. And he says, and if not knowing that this is death, is a must upon everybody, and that eventually we will meet, the first will meet the last, we would be even sadder. Okay? But we are still sad. So he was saying sallallahu alayhi wasallam what? He says, I am sad because I lost my son. And if I did not know that, everybody has to go through this. And if I did not know that I'm going to see him again, I'd be even sadder. But even with knowing all of that, I'm still sad. So he said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he's a human being who feels all of this, and it does not contradict iman for a person to cry over his son or his daughter if something happens to them. What is forbidden is to wail and cry out loud and complain about Allah Azza wa Jal or Allah's destiny. That is disallowed. But the part related to what we are talking about is that the Prophet ﷺ called it Mizmaru Shaitan. Okay? Another famous incident, right, where the Prophet ﷺ called music, the Sahabi called it Mizmaru Shaitan, is the famous incident when Abu Bakr came and entered the house of the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet was on his bed, lying down, his head to the wall, and Aisha radiallahu anha had invited two young girls, and they were singing on the day of Eid. And they had with them a duf, the tambourine. Okay? So when Abu Bakr entered the house and he saw this, he says, Mizmaru shaitani fi bayti Rasulillah. He says, the flute of the shaitan, the devil, in the house of the Prophet ﷺ, meaning you're speaking to Aisha, how could you do this? Bring this to the house of the Prophet ﷺ. Okay, they're what? I mean, they're just young girls singing, and they have the duf, the tambourine. Now, the tambourine is, you can Google it, the duf, but it's without those metal jingles. If you would go online and you look at the picture of a tambourine, you'd find mostly of them, the pictures is just duf, right? And has these metal jingles all around. The duf that they used at the time of the Prophet ﷺ didn't have these metal jingles. Okay, it just opened on one side and closed on the other, and they would use strike on it for rhythm, right? So they were using that. So he objected to it. The Prophet ﷺ turned to him and said, "Oh, Abu Bakr, let them, because this is a day of Eid for ours. Let them, this is day of Eid." So the Prophet ﷺ allowed it. But the scholars have said he did not object to Abu Bakr calling music the what? The flute of the shaitan. Because he sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, in another hadith, he also called it that. Because they say, where did Abu Bakr learn that music is mizmaru shaitan? He says he learned it from the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam himself. There's another hadith that calls it that. Now, what does it mean, calling it the flute of the shaitan or the clarinet of the shaitan? What is it? Why is it called that? They say, Allah alam, it is called that because the shaitan uses it to call people, to entice people into sin. As a person, a shepherd who's using his flute maybe, and he plays it, and he's able to control the herd, and they follow him because of it. Is that the shaitan like that? He uses that music to kind of grow and feed our desires. Desire for this world and the desire for the opposite sex, basically to stray away from Allah Azza wa Jal. So it's called that because the shaitan uses it just like a shepherd leading animals. The shaitan will use it to lead people away from Allah Azza wa Jal. So it's also said about about music, and this is the statements from the Sahaba, and then the scholars adopted that later on. الشيطان الغناء ينبت النفاق في القلب. He says, singing, we're talking really here about singing with instruments, right? Singing grows hypocrisy in the heart. This statement comes from the Sahaba. And we'll see some evidence from the Quran and Sunnah, inshallah, because I want you to know the background. Whatever you decide to do with it, at least you have an idea, where does this come from? So it says that singing grows hypocrisy in the heart. And they contrast that to the Quran. You say Quran grows what? Iman. So the more that you read and understand, your Iman increases. He says what singing does is that it takes you away from the Quran. It becomes sort of a rival competition with the Quran, competes with it. So they say that the person who's used to listening to music finds it very hard to listen to the Quran, devote a lot of time to the Quran, because there's always competition in the heart between these two things. We naturally love to listen to beautiful sounds. This is in us. Beautiful, enchanting sounds. We love to listen to that. So Allah Azza wa Jal, right, to satisfy that need that we have, had given us something that we can sing. Plus whatever is halal, you can sing poetry, but specifically Allah gave you something that you can sing all the time. That is the Quran, the recitation of the Quran. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said, لَيْسَ مِنَّا مَنْ لَمْ يَتَغَنَّ بِالْقُرْآنِ. It's not, they are not one of us who do not sing the Quran. By singing the Quran is by to sort of have a melody when you recite it. You don't have to have a beautiful voice, but at least you sing it with a melody that softens the Quran and brings it closer to your heart and the heart of those who are listening. And there are those who have beautiful, beautiful voices in the Quran. So when you listen to them, it satisfies that need that you have. Then afterwards, you don't really need to listen to this person or that person singing. But if you start listening to people singing, what happens is that your need, which is natural, your need for songs is satisfied somewhere else. And when it comes to the Quran, you'll find it very heavy and undesirable. So because of that competition between the two, one. Second, because it, as we said, it invites the love of the dunya into your heart. That's what songs do. Especially especially today, right? Especially if you look at the words, the lyrics, they're not decent. That's to say the least. They're not decent. They're all about this world. They're all about this dunya. They're all about the opposite sex. They're all about sex and all of that. So what does that grow inside all of us? The love of sin, the pursuit of sin, disease, right? So, of course, that's very difficult. When you start reading the Quran that prohibits all of this, and you are listening to music which encourages all of that, there's a clash, and you have to choose one of them. And you can't be today someone who's listening to both equally and enjoying both equally. It can't happen. If you like one, you're gonna like the other one less. So they say that it grows hypocrisy in the heart. Subhanallah wal-'iyadhu billah. So this is something to keep in mind. Malik rahimahullah, when they asked him about al-ghina, he says, إِنَّمَا يَفْعَلُهُ الْفُسَّاقُ عِنْدَنَا. He says, only the fussaq, like the public sinners, only those people who sing among us, or in our city. They're talking about Medina. Only those who are public sinners are the ones who are engaged in singing. Nobody else does that. So let's see a couple of evidence, one from the Quran, one from the Sunnah, about music, so that we understand at least if there's a basis to it, what is the basis for it, and we'll proceed inshallah. So evidence from the Quran is Allah Azza wa Jal saying in Surah Luqman, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَن يَشْتَرِي لَهْوَ الْحَدِيثِ لِيُضِلَّ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. He says, among people, or there are people who will purchase, buy, or choose. Okay? And that word could be interpreted as all of that. Purchase and buy, or choose. Entertaining speech, or entertaining words, so that they can misguide and take people away from the path of Allah. So, most of the people of tafsir, when you go to the books of tafsir, most of them, and most of what they report from the Sahaba and the Tabi'een, is that this entertaining speech is music and singing. Most of the tafsir is that this entertaining speech is music and singing. And in fact, you have a senior Sahabi like Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, who is an expert in the Quran, swearing by Allah Azza wa Jal 3 times that it is singing. And he means singing with music. So what does that mean here? It means that there are some people who will seek and pursue entertaining speech or entertaining words. Okay? And when they seek them, these things will take them away from Allah Azza wa Jal. What are those things that will take away from Allah? Anything that is in opposition to them. So it is said, for instance, Wallahu A'lam, that somebody hired at the time of the Prophet ﷺ in Mecca 2 women to sing so that they can distract people from listening to the Quran. It is said also that someone went and collected stories from Persia, entertaining story from Persia, Faris. And he brought that to Mecca and he said, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, of course he didn't say sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he says, Muhammad is telling you stories, I have better stories, come and listen to me and don't listen to him. So that is someone buying and pursuing entertainment to take him away from the path of Allah and to misguide others from the path of Allah Azza wa Jal. So in fact, any speech, okay, or any words, written even or spoken, that will take away from Allah Azza wa Jal could be called lahwul hadith. Let's call them entertainment or entertaining speech. And a clear example, according to Ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu, is that it is singing and songs that they will take away from Allah Azza wa Jal. That's one. There's another, this is an ayah from the Quran. We have a hadith. There's multiple hadiths, but this is the strongest hadith because it's in Bukhari. The Prophet ﷺ said that in my ummah there is going to be maskhun wa qadhfun wa khasf. There will be people who will turn into be animals, and people who will have received punishment from the sky, and people who the earth underneath will sink, khasf and maskh and qadhf. They said, oh Allah, O Prophet of Allah, who are those people? He says, those are people يستحلون الخمر والخزاء والمعارف. These are people who will make lawful alcohol and silk and musical instruments. Ma'azif, musical instruments. So he's saying, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that towards the end of time there will be people who will make all of these things lawful, and it seems like lawful publicly. So they'll be drinking, they'll be wearing silk, they'll be playing music, and towards the end of time, he said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that they will be punished because of this. Now, notice here that he had combined the 3. He says they make lawful 1, 2, 3, means that these 3 are not. And second, they came together, and the company tells you about the nature of each one of them. Silk is haram, alcohol is haram. What is music? It's also haram, because he says yastahilluna, they make it lawful, meaning that it isn't. Right? So this is evidence from the Quran and evidence from the Sunnah, and there are other ahadith from the Prophet ﷺ. Now, when you go to the madhabs, the Hanafis, the Shafi'is, the Malikis, and statements from the founders of the madhab, all of them have statements against music, against musical instruments. Okay? And the madhabs, the 4 madhabs in general, are against music. So subhanAllah, to have something even the 4 madhabs agree on, more or less, there will be like within the madhab, oh, we dislike this, or we dislike it this way, or some, small minor details and exceptions. But in general, the madhabs, all of them, the thrust of the madhab is that they are against music, right? Against music, especially instruments. Now, singing without instruments is different. That is going to be allowed, inshallah. We'll see with some conditions. But using musical instruments, that would be forbidden. And I'll quote you, inshallah, something that Shafi'i said. He said, I left Baghdad. He was in Baghdad. He says, I left Baghdad, and I left behind something that the lawless Zanadiqa, okay, have invented, called at-taghbir. And they are preventing people from the Quran or blocking people from the Quran by it. He said that I saw something, I'll explain to you what at-taghbir is. I saw something in Baghdad called at-taghbir that people had invented. they're stopping people from the Quran when they do it. He says, what is at-taghbir? At-taghbir is, and it's going to seem compared to what we have today as so innocent. It's like people who will gather, okay, and they will recite poetry about the hereafter, or poetry about avoiding this life and the temptations of this life. So kind of it's Islamic poetry, right? There's no evil meanings in it, no wicked meanings in it. And what they will do is that they will have a stick and they will strike with the stick, right, on wood to just create this rhythm as they are reciting that poetry. And some of them, right, in the throes of engagement, some of them may just rise and start, shaking and dancing. That's it. That's what at-taghbir is. Where's the musical instrument there? It's just a stick. And what are the words? Typically, right, they're about the hereafter and about, not being deceived by this life. But he looked at this, radiallahu anhu, Ash-Shafi'i, and he said this is invented by the lawless, meaning people who have want to exit from Islam, right? And he says by that, what they're doing, they're stopping people from the Quran. Why? He says, his problem with it, he doesn't explain, but I'm telling you, inshallah. Yeah, his problem with it is not the poetry itself. The poetry, it's fine. The problem is that they gather and they bring that stick and they start, hitting, the piece of wood with it, creating a rhythm, creating an atmosphere, and all of them gather, and then they start dancing, or start shaking, or moving to the side. He says that's what he looked at, and he considered that to be a bid'ah, an evidence of people who want to exit from Islam. And he said this stops people from listening to the Quran because it becomes like a substitute. And if you go online, I don't know if you've seen it or not, there are people today who do something like that. They read poetry and they dance, right? Or they shake left and right. The Shafi'i radiallahu anhu, he said, I saw this, and he said this is not something that a Muslim should be doing. So see how innocent that is compared to what the music that we listen to today. And yet he, rahimahullah wa radiya anhu, considered this something to be abominable, something that should not be pursued. So again, why is that? Because it distracts people and takes them away from Allah Azza wa Jal. It takes them away from enjoying the Quran. Okay, it really takes you away from enjoying the Quran, savoring the Quran, because when you already have satisfied your need by listening to music, you don't have any appetite to listen to the Quran anymore. You already have satisfied that need. And in a sense, you also have corrupted your taste. Now you say to yourself, before I move to the next point, you say, okay, I'm used to listening to music. How do I transfer? How do I stop? It's very hard for me to stop. You say, inshallah, if it's really hard for you to stop immediately, what you can do, inshallah, is gradually, right, kind of like tilt the balance towards the Quran. So do more of reading of the Quran, listening to the Quran, less to music, gradually, until you find the sweetness of listening to the Quran and reading it. Inshallah, and if you do that, you're not going to need to listen to music anymore. And just think about it, subhanAllah. Yani listening to music is not a necessity. We made it maybe a necessity, but it's not a necessity. And it's not also natural. I mean, natural in the sense of what? If you go to the time of the Prophet ﷺ, if you wanted to listen to music, how would you listen to it? What would you do? It's not around you. Now I have a phone with a library that can access probably hundreds of thousands of songs. At the time of the Prophet ﷺ, okay, just to show you what is natural and what is not, what we have added because of technology. At the time of the Prophet ﷺ, if you wanted to hear a song, where would you hear it? You'd have to sing to yourself, okay, or somebody maybe in your family, or maybe if you're outside, somebody by chance might be singing, right? And without instruments, just simply, a cappella, just that, his voice only. That's it. So if it's something that they used, if they wanted to, they'd have to go after it and seek it, and it would be on occasions. It would not be something, that it'd be available every day. We, on the other hand, it's available every minute. It's there every minute if you wish. So to be able to detach from that, I understand it may not be very simple and very easy, But what we can say, inshallah, is just start to tip towards what? The Quran, and less towards listening to music, and just say to yourself, it's really not something that Allah Azza wa Jalla made it natural that I need to or have to listen to it all the time. I could live without it. Okay? And you'll find sometimes when you're really busy and you don't think about listening to music, you end up, the whole day you're not listening to it, and you're fine. You're okay. You don't need it to, support your mood. You don't need it to energize you. There are other ways, inshallah, to do all of this. Let me move, inshallah, to the next point. Then he moves on, and he says, most outlawed singing, he's saying that most did outlaw singing, but some allowed it. Then he says, the one who stays home to listen to it, does not overdo it, and sings discreetly for himself, then it is okay for him to do it. He's here really talking about singing without instruments. Okay? Just like you at home, and you're just singing. You have a beautiful voice, or maybe you think you have a beautiful voice. Allah Alam, all of us think that our voice is beautiful. So you think, and you start singing something, poetry, this or that, or you're making up your own thing. He's saying something like that is allowed. There's nothing wrong with it. Why? Because it's simple. Okay, you're not a professional. The problem with it, he would say that, and some other scholars have said, it says singing is not a profession. It should not become a profession. You should not become a professional in singing, meaning that you really study how to sing and you improve your voice, and it becomes so attractive that it could become a source of fitna, even though there is no music in it. He says what we want is what? Simple, kind of like naive singing. Like that a shepherd would be singing for his flock. Or at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't have professional singers, no. But if they're traveling, there is something that is called huda or hida. What is that? Is that the Prophet ﷺ, when they travel, he would ask one of them, one for the men and one for the women, right? To sing poetry. So he'll be singing poetry. That helps them in travel and helps the animals to pick up the pace. So that is allowed. And there's no instruments in it, but it is singing. That is allowed. But that person is not a professional singer. He could have a beautiful voice, but he's not a professional singer. So he says something like this is allowed. Poetry, whether you composed it or somebody else, you sing it or you're listening to it. He says if it's not done professionally and you're not overdoing it, meaning this is not something that you're doing all the time. You wake up from sleep and you need to listen to a nasheed. By the way, a lot of the nasheeds that we have today, there are a lot of problems with them. Sometimes problem with the lyrics, and other times problems with the fact that they're using instruments. So in that, they're really not a nasheed. They're just songs. Right? Maybe the words are better, but still, the fact that it's still a problem that they're using instruments. Anyway, so it's not that you're listening to nasheeds without music, without instruments every single day, if you're transitioning, maybe, but just as a norm, it shouldn't be, right? So you're not that dependent on it. You're not so consumed by it. You don't need it every single day or every single minute. He says if that's the case, then you're okay. That's allowed. And that's the correct opinion, because at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, as we mentioned, there is that thing that is called huda or hida or an inshad. Whether a mother does it for her children, somebody does it at home for his family, doesn't gather people, does it for his family, a wife does it for her husband, a husband does it for his wife, that's allowed. But you're not supposed to, if you're male, to listen to a female who's not mahram of yours singing, even if there's no instruments in it. Okay, because that's a source of fitna also. And if a woman listening to a male, non-mahram, sing, becomes a source of fitna for her, then she should stop listening. Okay? So if it becomes like, it just inflames desires and she starts thinking, oh, I love him and I want to meet him and this and that, and she follows him like she follows a celebrity, then that is not allowed. So you have to be careful that just that simple entertainment doesn't turn into something that is haram, a fascination, a celebrity-like attachment, right? That's why we're saying that it should be kind of a simple endeavor, not a professional, where somebody, takes lessons and, excel in it, and they produce videos and, and they're handsome and they're beautiful, and they present that to the Muslim Ummah saying here, this is Islamic. That's not necessarily Islamic. That's not. What is Islamic is a simple, naive, unsophisticated singing without instruments that is done for the purpose of entertainment on occasions, right? On occasions, without any complications, inshallah. And also just to keep in mind is some Islamic groups, right, they consider listening to music and dancing when listening to that music an act of worship. They call it as-sama'. And that is definitely not an act of worship. And I don't know if you probably have seen videos, or you could see videos of that, of people, as I said, they're dressed Islamically and they will be together, and there's these nasheeds sitting in groups, and they start dancing. And they consider that as one of the means to come closer to Allah and purify the soul and elevate the spirit, and that is not in Islam. The Prophet ﷺ did not do it. There is no clear evidence that the Prophet has ever done it, or the Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ have ever done it. There's no evidence of that. So there's really, it shouldn't be done. It should not be done. So we said that nasheeds are allowed as long as there is no musical instruments in them and the lyrics are fine, inshallah, and it's better that they be done by amateurs, not by professionals. The last thing, inshallah, that we'll say is about reading the Quran. We said that reading the Quran is the best cure and substitute for any attachment or even addiction to music. But it will take time to make that transition. Okay? So if you find yourself unable to make it, like simply unable to make it, and I'm not making an excuse for anybody, I'm just simply saying that there are some people who may at this moment, they can't really let go of it. The medicine for it, inshallah, is to gradually start transitioning into more of the Quran and less of the opposite. And keep asking Allah Azza wa Jal to turn you away from what He hates and towards what He loves, subhanahu wa ta'ala. They say reading the Quran with alhan, like reading the Quran with a kind of a rhythm or a kind of a melody that is imported from outside the Quran. Sort of like music. Right? And there is something that they call the maqamat. This maqamat and this maqam, I'm not really versed into the maqamat to be able to comment on them. But they simply say that when you read the Quran, let it be simple. Let it be simple. Right? You don't need to imitate this person or that person, but you can listen to this person and that person. And that'd be, as I said, a great substitute to listening to music. I like Sheikh this Fulan, I like this Sheikh this Fulan because of their beautiful voice. Listen to it because it's going to satisfy a need that you have. But if you're reading the Quran with melodies imported from outside of the Quran, trying to imitate this and that, you can do this as long as you're not changing the words of the Quran, elongating what should not be elongated. Okay? So if you're not doing that and you're preserving the words of the Quran and the vows of the Quran as they were revealed, and as they're supposed to be read, it's okay to read, as they say, with alhan, with melodies. Just basically learn, if you do not know, the basic rules of tajweed and observe them. And if you do that, inshallah, whatever melody you choose to read the Quran, whether it is sad, whether it is not, that is fine, inshallah, Rabbil Alameen. You don't necessarily need to imitate. And the Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ, some of them were really well known for having beautiful voices in the Quran. The prophets of Allah, Dawood alayhi salam, was known to have beautiful voice, a beautiful voice in reading the Quran. The Quran, which was the book that Allah had revealed to him. And to the extent that they say that the animals would stop to listen to him, alayhi salam. The animals, the birds will stop to listen to him. And Abu Musa al-Ash'ari radiallahu anhu, among the Sahaba, was known to have a beautiful voice in the Quran. And the Prophet ﷺ told him that you were given a mizmar, a flute from the flutes of Dawood alayhi salam. He likened the beauty that Dawood alayhi salam had when he recited the Quran to having flutes, like as if he had musical instruments within him. So he told Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, you have this beautiful voice that reminds and is like and is part of what Dawood alayhi salam had. So you can read with whatever melody you had, whatever melody that Allah Azza wa Jal had given you, as long as it touches your heart when you are reading, as long as you are reacting when you are reading to the Quran to it internally, then this is what we want, inshallah, from reading the Quran. And you will find that the Quran will give you a lot more than what songs would give you. Think about it, subhanallah. There is a comparison or a parallel between Quran and food. The Quran and good food, and music and bad food. If you are bad food, let's take sugar, right? If you eat something that is high in sugar, okay, your blood sugar will rise, will spike, right? Will spike, and after that will drop, and you'll experience a crash. So it will go up, you'll be very hyper because of the sugar that was injected, and then it will crash. So you feel really energized quickly, and then out of energy very quickly. This is like songs. Like when somebody sings or you're listening to a song, what will happen is that it will change your mood immediately, especially if it's a happy song. Immediately it will go up, and you'll feel happy and excited and whatever. When that song ends, you'll crash. Because there's emptiness, right? Stillness, there's nothing. It leaves you with nothing. So it goes up and you crash right after. Different than if you eat something wholesome, okay? The blood level, right, or the sugar level rises gradually, okay? It doesn't spike up very high, and it's not that immediate. So it goes gradually up and then gradually down. There's more moderation when you're eating something wholesome. And the Quran does the same thing. There's no immediate spike. The Quran, you'll slowly build up to it, right? You're going slowly, you'll build up, build up, build up, build up, build up. And when you stop reading the Quran for the rest of the day, it will leave a trace in your heart. It will start going down, of course. That's when you start to need to read the Quran again the next day, or maybe later in that day. But it will take you up slowly and will come down slowly, and will leave you with a lot more than whatever song you have listened to is going to leave you with. So subhanallah, we said that they are in competition with each other. So pick whatever Allah Azza wa Jal loves, and you'll know that Allah Azza wa Jal will bless you because of it. And after some time, you're not going to even feel the need to listen to music. Not at all. You'll forget about all of this, bi'idhnillah Azza wa Jal. So pick whatever Allah Azza wa Jal loves. Understand that there is evidence for it in the Quran. There is evidence for it in the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we ask Allah Azza wa Jal that He allows us, gives us the strength for us to do what He loves and to avoid what He hates, to give us the wisdom so that we see what is true as true, and the strength to follow it, and what is false as false, and the strength to avoid it. We ask Him subhanahu wa ta'ala to fill our hearts with the love of the Quran, so that we recite it in the morning and in the evening, and we enjoy its recitation, and we learn from that recitation, and to make us of the people of the Quran. Not of the people of music, but of the people of the Quran. We ask Allah Rabbil Alameen that if we are people who are afflicted or are addicted to listening to music, then Allah Azza wa Jal will take that away from us and will give us instead love, deep love in our hearts, so that we would listen to the Quran instead and enjoy listening to the Quran and to the words of Allah Azza wa Jal more. This is what I have, inshaAllah, for today. Jazakumullahu khairah for joining me. This is inshallah, in case you have missed it or missed parts of it, inshallah, this is inshallah is available on Facebook, and this is going to be inshallah available on Instagram, and will be uploaded inshallah shortly, I hope inshallah within 24 hours or so, inshallah, on YouTube. So if you have questions about any of this, let me know, inshallah. I don't see any. Maybe I can answer them next week. And next week, inshallah, we'll meet you at the same time, 7 o'clock Toronto time, PM, 7 a.m. Malaysia time, inshallah. We'll talk, inshallah, continue talking about Islamic etiquette and manners, and we'll be moving, inshallah, to talking about poetry in general, and I think for commanding the good and forbidding the bad, inshallah Rabbil Alameen. We'll see you, inshallah, next week. جزاكم الله خيرا سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك والحمد لله رب العالمين. To all of you I say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.